The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Summers in the 80s watching TV, Dustin lazy, can't believe that's how I spent all my time. Every day I watch a show and it's the one that you all know. Wacky stories of those kids who went to Bayside High. It's alright, cause you remember that. It's alright, say you remember that. It's alright, do you remember that show?
Hey there, TV lovers, and welcome to the third installment of our special Saved by the Summer series here on Remember That Show? We're continuing our exploration of the Saved by the Bell prequels, sequels, and spin-offs. Normally, I'd introduce myself as William Bruce West, but to commemorate our discussion of Saved by the Bell, the new class, I've been recast with a fresh young face named Killian Spruce Jest.
But don't worry, the producers of Remember That Show have kept your old pal Adam Pope around for continuity's sake. I'm not going anywhere, except to the bank, because I renegotiated my contract to make the big bucks over 7 seasons. But wait, now I see another familiar face returning to the studio?
That's right. William Bruce West is back, baby. The producers realized nobody wanted a pale imitation of the real thing and kicked that Killian kid to the curb. So now I'm back as an even more outlandish version of myself. Allow me to utter my famous catchphrase. We're too smart for TV these days. We're too smart for TV these days. We're too smart for TV these days.
But before you descend even further into madness, Will, we better get this show on the road. So it's time to look back at our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song.
Adam, our show today deals with a new group of students being introduced to an audience that was very familiar with the setting for their adventures. For some viewers, it may have been hard to accept these new kids. Can you think of a time when you were the new kid in class trying to fit in?
I can, I've mentioned this briefly before, but in 6th grade, I spent 6 months living in New Jersey at my grandma's house. I was sleeping in my mom's old bedroom. I attended her high school, which had been since converted to a middle school by that time. So I was literally the new kid from California amongst all these kids who had grown up together, and I'd always been in the same school, same house my whole life and all the way through high school. But it was interesting because I'd learned about their local hangouts. Like there was a pizza parlor that everybody went to after school to get a slice. It was just like the Max. It had the video games. It had all the stuff you needed. There was a place called The Pit, which was this literal pit surrounded by trees where kids would go to settle scores. Like I saw 2 kids start pushing each other in the halls, getting into a fight, and one shouted, like as his friends were pulling him away, he's like, "I'll see you at the pit after school. You better be there." So we all went after school to see the showdown, but only one of the kids showed up and the other was labeled a coward, for months to come. So it was so funny, like that actually existed. But it was like a new beginning for me because back home, I mentioned everyone else was kind of annoyed by me. But in New Jersey, I was seen as like this big city surfer dude, which was so far from the truth. But people gave me the benefit of the doubt of being a cool California guy or something anyway. So I would hang out with my same age cousin and his friends, but eventually just made my own friends. I befriended this kid named Jason. I'd hang out at his house. We're watching Night of the Living Dead and listening to Ozzy Osbourne albums. It's just a whole new experience for me. So that was a real magical time. I always look back fondly on that, where being the new kid was actually to my benefit, I guess. But what about you, Will? Were you ever the new kid somewhere?
I just want to point out you were the inverse of Jesse's stepbrother Eric. You came from the West Coast to be the surfer guy on the East Coast instead of the tough New York guy over in California. But yes, I was the new kid middle school. I've only been to I don't know, 2, 3 schools because they had so many grade levels. I was in one school that was kindergarten through 6th, and then at 6th grade, after that, had to figure out where to go. Went to Catholic school for 6 weeks, and that was a horrible experience. But kids from my elementary school had gone there with me, so it was still kind of like a college year situation where half the cast was still together. But after the nuns just hated me. My mom picked me up one day and was like, "You're never going back there again." So then I went to like public school for a year, which I had like never done before. And I was definitely the new kid, but like there were kids there I recognized from like, let's say like the neighborhood, like kids from church and things like that. So I still wasn't really alone. It wasn't until eighth grade where I went back to private school, and it was supposed to be this like stopgap 1 year kind of deal. And it was horrible because I knew nobody there. And I would come home like crying probably like the first like 3 months of like, I don't have friends. Like, I don't know how to make friends. I don't know these people. Like, it was rough. That's eighth grade. So like we're saying first semester, I hate this place. I am very lonely. I don't know anybody. I don't have friends. Second semester though is when I went to Russia. So then it's kind of like, oh, this place kind of opened up doors and gave me opportunities, and now I don't want to leave. So then I like begged my mom to let me stay, even though we really couldn't like afford it and all this stuff. But like I stayed from 8th through 12th, you know, but like that was probably the hardest new kid scenario for me.
Wow. And neither of us were ever a new kid on the block. Although I wish. Well, Will, here's the thing though. Saved by the Bell, the new class, was constantly adding new blood to their cast in hopes of catching the attention and interest of viewers. In fact, many sitcoms that start running dry for story ideas after a few seasons, they tend to fall back on the trope of adding new characters to the cast in order to keep the show fresh. Now, often it's a young child who producers hope will add an extra cuteness factor, maybe. Just it's an established formula, but here's a new element. Like, for example, both Family Ties and Growing Pains added new babies to the cast, and then each of them inexplicably grew into like preschoolers between seasons. So that was a weird choice. Full House added a set of twin baby boys, right, to the Tanner Kitsopoulos household once Stephanie and Michelle had grown into young women. And even the independent single working woman Murphy Brown had a baby by the end of the series, very controversially.
Very controversial.
So, Will, can you think of another sitcom where a new young character was added to the cast for better or for worse?
There are tons of examples, but the one that's always like foremost in my mind was Married with Children in season 7, when they introduced the character of Seven, who is the child of Peggy's cousins, played by Bobcat Goldthwait and Linda Blair. And they just kind of like dump Seven off on the Bundys. And it's weird because like he really leans into the precocious, ain't I a stinker, Dennis the Menace kind of thing, but it didn't fit the vibe of the show, which was very adult. So it was kind of like, why are you trying to be all cutesy when Al just came from the nudie bar and he wants to read Jugs while wearing his No Ma'am shirt? You know, it's like it didn't work tonally. That's one of those situations on a show. I feel this way about like Stargate Atlantis and a bunch of other shows where you knew there was a plan, but real life got in the way, and then they had to fix on fail and accommodate things. Because in season 6, Peggy is pregnant because Katie Sagal was pregnant. And so the Bundys would have had a baby going forward, but Katie Sagal's baby was stillborn, and the writing staff didn't want to put her through trauma, so they wrote off that entire season as a dream. So then to get some use out of like the youth skewing stories, like, okay, let's try this Seven thing. But they just like abandon him. Like his parents don't come back to get him. He doesn't get captured by like the CIA. He gets dumped off on like the Darcys, and he's never seen or heard from again.
So we are on the same page, because that was going to be my pick too. It was just so odd, the choice of that. And here's the thing. I always thought, because Married with Children was often attacking, standard sitcom tropes, I thought that he was written into this just to be there for a few episodes as a joke. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just like, oh, this is where we add the cousin Oliver. This is where we add the little cute kid, right? But it just kept going. And I remember, because I think he was on like 12 episodes or something like that, I was just like, what is happening with this kid? He's a terrible actor. I mean, I remember one episode in particular, which I'm sure, I can't remember if you said it was your grandma or your mom that loved the episodes where the Bundys banded together to beat up other families. But
My
like,
grandma.
Grandma. Yeah, so it's like the birthday party in the park, and there's this like rich family that's taken over the park, and then they finally just beat them all up. So I remember those moments, but like it was never because of Seven. There was never anything he did that added to the show. It was a strange choice for that show in particular that it wasn't a joke. Like you say, like they were trying to make it work.
But like we discussed way back on the Unhappily episode, it felt more like an Unhappily joke in that like they would have brought him in to tear down that trope and it would have like culminated in something. But like they weren't as mean-spirited over on Fox as they were at the WB.
Just because we're talking Saved by the Bell, we do have to mention Mr. Belding's baby that gets born in the elevator, because that was another one where you're just like, he has a baby now. And in the show that we're going to talk about, that baby gets brought up a lot. And the fact that he's named Baby Zach is a little troubling.
Yes. Yeah, well, Peter Engel, the producer of Saved by the Bell, was building a TV empire by 1993 when Saved by the Bell: The New Class hit Saturday mornings on NBC. In addition to the short-lived Saved by the Bell: The College Years that we discussed last episode, Engel had also created another hit series for the network called California Dreams in 1992, and would soon produce other teen-based sitcoms like Hang Time, City Guys for the TNBC lineup. Malibu CA was syndicated. That's when he left NBC.
Oh.
But bottom line is, it was working and nothing was going to stop this money train from rolling. That's really all there is to it.
Yeah, there's not a big explanation as to why they kept this series going. It was working. But let's tell you what it was all about in our elevator pitch. So Saved by the Bell: The New Class debuted on September 11th, 1993. Oh dear. And ran for a whopping 7 seasons until it was canceled on January 8th, 2000. When I just think about it, as I graduated in 2000, I'm class of 2000, so it's very odd that this show lasted up to that point when I was graduating. Because it ran so long, we're going to break format, okay? We're going to kind of give our cheers and jeers on each season, just give our general thoughts along the way, because there is so much to talk about this show, okay? And so much. So by the end of The New Class, life at Bayside had changed quite a bit. But at the start, it literally felt like an alternate reality version of the original series. Because in the Zach Morris role, we had a Joshua Jackson lookalike, Robert Sutherland Telfer, as Scott Erickson, the smooth-talking schemer who broke the fourth wall, spoke directly to the camera, you know. In the Screech role was the goofy Isaac Lidsky as Barton Weasel Wiesel. Taking AC Slater's place as the resident jock was the handsome Jonathan Angel as Tommy D, which stood for DeLuca. And taking over for Lisa Turtle was the sassy Bianca Lawson, playing Megan Jones. I almost said Mega Jones. Mega Jones. Megan Jones. Filling in for Kelly Kapowski as the resident goody-goody was Natalia Ceruglia? Is that how you say it? Gigliuti?
Chigliuti.
What? Oh, you say so.
I followed her for many years.
Okay, but she was playing Lindsay Warner, and then finally the Jessie, but really just kind of there, was played by Bonnie Rusevage as Vicky Needleman. Now, the only carryover from the original series was Dennis Haskins as Mr. Belding. And of course, we had the same Bayside High School sets and even identical opening credits. They just added the new class, but the new cast members were just swapped out for the old and the little, character windows. So, Will, I have to ask, what was your reaction upon first seeing, the premiere of the new class? Here it is. Here's what we're doing.
As the kids say, I was hype. It was the best September 11th America ever saw. Because if I'm not mistaken, I didn't research this, but I feel like this is the official debut of TNBC. It didn't have that branding when Saved by the Bell launched. And even when California Dreams came along and you had The Guys Next Door and Name Your Adventure, this is when it really solidified into a block. This is Saturday morning Snick, basically, so that was a big deal that morning. Like, not only did you have the debut of Saved by the Bell in the new class, you had Name Your Own Adventure coming back, and that still had Mario Lopez. You had Running the Halls, which was short-lived, but it was still like got people in there. And then you had like a turning point for California Dreams, where like the Jenny and Matt are pretty much gone, and now Jake is the leader, and it was like a pivot for that show. This was like Saturday morning must-see TV, and I was there for it. Like, I remember all of it. Like, I was taking notes. I was like, okay, so who are these people's names? But the thing that always jumped out at me that everybody talks about was it really was We've Got Saved by the Bell at Home. Like, they just cast new people in the same old roles and they renamed them. Like, even though there's no Jesse, like, everyone else is like, they're the same. They just updated the kids. Like, they were newer, sleeker models, but like Scott is Zach, Tommy D is Slater. They didn't really even try. I mean, they tried to build the supporting cast a little more. Like, what's his name? Crush or something, who works at the Max. He's kind of like Ox back in the day, but he's not just like a comic relief character. Like, he kind of is, but he's like the dumb jock who works at the Max, but he falls in love with somebody in the group. Like, I felt like it played better with its supporting cast than the original show. But after that pilot, I'm just like, wow. So Scott and Weasel are just Zach and Screech. Like, they didn't even try. And it felt really lazy. When it ended, it was kind of like, okay, everybody's like hot and like they're doing what they need to do. But it's also like a feeling of, so here we go again, huh?
That was my reaction just from the get-go. I remember being absolutely like disgusted. Like, I gave it maybe 2 episodes, then I just gave up on the new class completely. I said, this is what they're doing? Like, I couldn't handle what I felt were less charismatic actors on the same show. But that's also partially why we're doing this Saved by the Summer series, because on a previous episode, I just called it crap. I just randomly brought it up. It needed to be re-examined because I never gave it enough time. I would see comic book ads for it. I would see, occasionally I'd flip on, NBC in the mornings and be like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. But like, of what I liked in that first season, I mean, Bianca Lawson to me is the standout character. She's the one who feels unique. Honestly, I would have made her the Zach Morris. Give it a fresh direction. Like, rip off Clarissa Explains It All. Do that instead of the original series. I also like Natalia Sigliani. I like the Lindsay character because to me, she does have like the perfect tone, like the cartoonish sweetness, lots of energy. I see why they kept her around for several seasons. I do want to point out though, just in terms of continuity, I did have a disappointment that we didn't get Duddy and the other future Baysiders that were hanging out with a mustachioed Mr. Belding from the time capsule episode. Like, they were right there. You've already cast them. Just bring them in.
But wasn't that like 20 years in the future?
I think it was. I think it was supposed to be 2003 or something.
Because
yeah.
Also, that's an alternate timeline based on how this series is.
Yeah, exactly. No, it doesn't work at all. But speaking of which, there is one little bit of trivia I want to bring up. Last episode, I was asking, how long were they sitting on that graduation episode? Because it seemed like such a change immediately in everybody. So I have this book. It's the unauthorized Saved by the Bell. It's from 1992, and it was something you could get from like Scholastic Book Club or the Troll newsletter, right? And in this, they're already interviewing the cast about the series is over. In 1992, it says that they already filmed the graduation episode, but they're going to be doing this Hawaiian, series and all that. So 1993, they literally filmed it a year ahead of time, which is kind of insane to think about. It's just like, yeah, like it'll be ready when we need it. But in the meantime, like we said, we got the Tory episodes and everything else to fill stuff out. So it was just so odd to me to see that was the case. Like I can imagine like 6 months maybe as you're ramping up, but now we know it was at least a year.
I always forget where Hawaiian style falls in the timeline because I don't love it. But also, there is an airing, and I'm not sure if it's the original airing or if it's a rebroadcast, but leading up to the debut of the new class, there are actual bumpers where the original class passed the torch to the new class, and I can't find them on YouTube. Like, I don't remember this, but like I would love to see, because we never, except for like the whole like, hey, they're gonna tear down the school, whoa, the Max burned down, that kind of, you don't see a lot of overlap, especially like with the whole cast. So I would love to see that. But yeah, I always forget where Hawaiian style falls in things.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's its own deal. But yeah, I heard about those interstitials where, like, Zach is talking to Scott and giving him Mr. Belding's secrets, like basically, like, here's what you can use. But yeah, somebody's got to have that somewhere.
Well, trying to duplicate the original show was deemed a misstep by the producers, and so by season 2, the show was already starting to forge its own new direction. Gone were the Scott, Weasel, and Vicky characters, and added to the mix were Christian Oliver as Pretty Boy from Switzerland, Brian Keller, Sarah Lancaster, aka a more likable Katherine Heigl type, as Rachel Myers, and Spanky Rogers as the energetic goofball Bobby Wilson. Of course, the biggest addition to the cast was Dustin Diamond, returning to the halls of Bayside as Samuel Screech Power, who becomes Mr. Belding's administrative assistant that operates out of a new high-tech office. Even Mark Blankfield's James the actor character was still working as a waiter at the Max and is brought back for an episode to impersonate an authority figure once again. By the end of season 2, the school was threatened to be demolished by a millionaire land developer that wanted to build condos on the school site. Coming to the rescue were former students A.C. Slater, Lisa Turtle, and Zach Morris, whose aunt was an old friend of the millionaire that convinced him to abandon his plan. Plus, how are they going to build condos? There's oil on that land.
Whatever happened to the oil?
Where's the oil?
It paid for Mr. Belding's office. That's what it did.
Adam, did you think this retooling gave the show enough of its own identity?
I mean, this is definitely like how they should have presented the show at launch. Like, you have a new dynamic here with Screech and Mr. Belding now as a mismatched comedy duo. It's not something we had. Power Rangers had Bulk and Skull,
I was
right?
gonna say they become Bulk and Skull.
Yeah.
Like, Spaulding, even like you can watch his waistline grow throughout the new class.
It's interesting because, yeah, they're using familiar elements in a new way, and just the writing of the show changes so much. There's no more fourth wall breaking. It's just like, here's the characters going through their day. Now, Christian Oliver's accent is very distracting, but I applaud them for making such a bold choice to have a Swiss guy as their lead, and there's no explanation. He's not an exchange student necessarily. It's treated kind of like he grew up in Sweden, but his family has lived in California, right?
That's an interesting interpretation, because I don't consider Christian Oliver as the lead during this period. In the vacuum of no Scott and Weasel and all that, I feel it helps to make it more of an ensemble cast. I don't believe they get another star until Ryan shows up.
I mean, I can see that. I guess they always position him in the same place Zach would be in the blocking. Like at the Max or other places where he's kind of like the head of the table, and he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do.
He's the pretty blonde kid, and it's like they had already built up Tommy as the dumb one, so it's like he wasn't going to be scheming. Like, Slater wasn't dumb, he was a jock, but Tommy is dumb. And like all he cares about is sports and cars, which is a point of contention in his relationship with Lindsay.
Yeah, there's that. Now, I want to say this, like, as a change out for kind of the goofball character, I really like the Bobby Wilson character. I like his energy. I don't understand, though. The actor's name is Spanky. Why did they just go with that? They just let him be Spanky on the show. That's happened many times before, right?
Ask Tony Danza.
But like, Weasel was just a little too low key for me. He was silly, but he wasn't like bringing it all the time. Also, as a kid, if I had known about the return of those original cast members at the end of the season, I would have tuned in for that. But it does feel like a little bit of a desperate move. They're like, get him to see Zach. He's here. He's here. But what about you?
I appreciated the retool because it's more loose. It's a little goofier. I have a soft spot in my heart for Sarah Lancaster because I kind of feel like she's one of the few success stories from the new class. Like she went on to Chuck, and like she really is a diet Katherine Heigl. But it's just kind of like Christian Oliver. I was more impressed this season by the return of Screech, mainly because the college years felt like it was taken from us too soon. It's great for continuity because like it's this through line from the original series. You can talk about Zach Morris all you want, but when you really look at the bird's eye view of the Saved by the Bell franchise, it's really Screech.
Yeah.
Because he's the mainstay. So I appreciated his return because it's like, okay, at least we're not retconning college. Like he's here on a work study program. We get to see him older and what does adult Screech seem like. So this is the season I kind of care more about the Laurel and Hardy building Screech relationship than the kids. Like the kids are kind of blah because I wanted to love Spanky Rogers. Like I really did. And he's like, he's the Mati of the group. Like he's got a lot of heart, but they don't really find any. They get to a point, especially once Bianca leaves, where it feels like they have to have a black character, but they never develop them. You get Bobby, and he doesn't do a whole lot, and then we'll get RJ in season 3, and we'll talk about him when we get to that point. But I'm just kind of like, the new people they brought in didn't really, as the Queer Eye guys used to say, zhuzh up the show. It just made me appreciate the holdovers from season 1.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, like a lot of these characters, they're in and out so fast. And speaking of which, season 3 at least took a new plot twist to get them in, which was the concept of students from Bayside's rival school Valley transferring in that were essentially replacing the just kind of absent stars from the previous season. Like Brian was shipped back to the Swiss Alps, apparently, he's replaced by a new handsome floppy haired dude, Richard Lee Jackson, playing Ryan Parker, right? Bobby and Megan were also just transferred out. They're just gone in favor of Salim Grant as RJ Collins and Samantha Becker as Maria Lopez, who ends up staying with the series to the end. She becomes the longest running student cast member on the show. I also feel like there's a lot more relationship drama in this season. There's these new romances, there's breakups, and just like in general, kind of all around drama that they're playing with instead of, there's still goofy comedy, but it's not the students as much that are as silly. I don't know. But they end up in multi-episode arcs. One takes place on a cruise ship, the other's at a ski lodge. There's also one that really stood out to me as an anti-smoking episode, which features a lot of smoking of cigarettes on screen. I'm like, I don't know if this is working. I think you're trying to make it look cool. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the strange thing about this is because they're doing a lot of stuff at the mall now, and it's a new mall set, and Mr. Belding and Screech become business partners. They open up a candy store at the mall. It's like, what? How is that even possible? You have to be at the school. But let's talk about this, Will. What is your opinion of taking the cast out of the Bayside setting, giving the show more variety in that way? And does it stray too far from the main premise that we were given?
No, I was fine with it, honestly, because people forget some of the best, like, out of school Saved by the Bell episodes. There's the murder mystery. There's Jesse's father's wedding. There's the Malibu Sands saga. There is the concert tickets at the mall where the guys are like chasing them. Like I loved those, especially like, because what is that, like junior year? Because I always said like in senior year, you got the like Jesse Kelly episode, then you got the Tori episode. But in junior year, you typically got an in-school episode and like not an on location, but just a departure from academics. So I was fine with this, especially because it mimicked what other shows were doing. Around this time, you've got the short-lived Breaker High from Canada, which is Saved by the Bell on a cruise ship, and then the Ski Lodge. As a Boy Meets World fan, Ski Lodge is where Corey cheats on Topanga with Velma from the Scooby-Doo movies. What's her name? Linda Cardellini. And you got to remember, these sets are built. They're there. They're all on the Sunset Gower lot, so it's like take advantage of them. So I was fine with these as long as like you still had school episodes, but this is when they go whole hog with the Valley thing. Remember, Scott came from Valley. The entire like through line theme of the new class is all this like defection from Valley. But I'm kind of on the understanding, and this is like a blind spot for me because for some reason I don't remember the full season 3 premiere. Did Valley shut down? Like season 3 is when there's an influx of Valley, and like that's what I never really understood, like the causation of that. It helped because it is a glimpse at what we would get from the 2020 reimagining. Those kids end up being bused to Bayside. For example, Maria Lopez, who I feel so dumb. It's like a Kaiser Sose moment where like I completely didn't realize she was named after Mario Lopez.
Yeah.
You know, like that's like a tribute character. But like Maria Lopez comes over from this and she's almost like Daisy, where she's this rough around the edges street kid. So she brings, as they would say in the 90s, flavor to Bayside. But like the weird thing is her character morphs over time. Like that's how she was able to be the longest running cast member, because nothing is sacred in terms of characterization or personality or anything like that. So it's like she's introduced as that, and she's a strong figure to center around of like there's this new climate in Bayside now because these other kids who aren't all rich and aren't from the Palisades are now kind of like infiltrating. But she's really the only one who makes a mark because like I was saying, Salim Grant does nothing. Like
No.
if I reimagine this show, he's the gay coded character. They can't really go there, especially then, but like that's really because he's really into fashion and he's a DJ. If you research him, that's all anyone can say about him. Doesn't seem like he worked after this, but like if the girls needed help with their style, or if somebody needed to know the hottest new music, they used RJ. But other than that, like he's not missed when he's gone, and he didn't fill a vacancy that was present. So I think the only real thing that worked here was the external sets and Maria Lopez.
Yeah, and I do like that from this point on, for the most part, they start giving reasons why the characters leave and why new ones have showed up, you know. But I do find the Mr. Belding and Screech stuff starting to get distracting because it's like two shows jammed together, and especially this thing is like, yeah, we're running a candy shop now, and you're just like, I don't understand how that can be possible. But also, like I said, they have to do their very special episode, right, for each season, at least one, and there's more to come. But the smoking one, the reason it hit me so hard is it's the Lindsay character who takes up smoking. And you're just like, why would, what, huh? And I had a girl who was in my drama class in high school, and she was like a couple of years older than me. She was like just a squeaky voiced little Asian girl. And then she invited me to like hang out with her at lunch one day. So we walk across the street to the neighborhood that, you know, is adjacent to the school. She pulls me behind the community pool. There was this little building, and I see all these kids smoking, and then she like pulls out her cigarettes and starts smoking and offers me one. I'm like, no, I don't smoke. But I just couldn't believe this like sweet little thing was like smoking, and that's how I felt watching this whole episode. I was just like, oh, shocking.
I'm going to say the most controversial statement in our 18 episodes, but nothing makes a hot woman hotter than smoking.
Wow.
It's not an instant makeover. It's not going to make a plain person hot. But if a person's already hot and they're smoking, it's a turbo boost. And Peter Engel knew that.
Wow. There is a subversive episode, is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. So season 4 said goodbye to Tommy D, who moved to Florida, Lindsay, who transferred to a private school, and RJ, who just doesn't come back. Welcoming instead Ryan's streetwise stepbrother, Nikki Farina, played by Ben Gould, Perky Larissa Olenek type Lindsay McKeon playing the likable Katie Peterson, and Anthony Harrell as Eric Little. This season features a lot more high school-based hijinks surrounding school dances, midterms, and student government. but also finds the gang heading off to space camp for a few episodes. Personally, exciting for me was a cameo by former Pink Ranger Amy Jo Johnson as a girl that Screech strikes up a relationship with at the frozen yogurt shop that he has opened up with Mr. Belding at the mall. But the big finale of the season is the two-part episode where Ryan accidentally burns down the Max, which leads to a cameo by Mario Lopez returning once again as AC Slater to reminisce about his memories at Bayside's favorite hangout. Adam, how do you feel about the burning down the Max storyline? Were there any episodes that stood out to you in this season?
Well, I mean, first things first, I just totally had flashbacks to Steve Urkel burning down Rachel's place on Family Matters. It's like, it's been done. It would have had more impact if they had to like find a new hangout or something, like something else. Like I think there's a club called Teen Machine that they talk about at least, but like they just rebuild the Max. It's got a new lighting scheme, but it just doesn't seem right to me. Also, like as far as episodes, there is one episode that stood out to me that Rachel's boss at the movie theater is sexist and he promotes Nikki to assistant manager over her just because he's a guy, even though, you know, Nikki had only been there for a few days. And I thought that was very poignant. There's also, I can't remember if it was this season, but there's an episode where Maria is good at karate and she's dating Ryan at the time and he feels emasculated because she stands up to a bully at the Max. So does that sound familiar? Like, I couldn't believe they were recycling the Zach dating Christy, the female wrestler storyline. Like, wow, okay, they really are just gonna kind of go through some of the classics, aren't they?
Some things are timeless.
What did you feel about the new Max?
It affected me when I watched it. Like, because I had grown with the Max all this time, and it did seem kind of like a big deal, but like knowing TV even then, I knew it would come back, and based on this time period, probably be turned into like some cyber cafe, because you know that was like the thing. It's like, look, we have digital menu screens, and you can check your email over here. You know, that kind of deal. So like, one thing that stands out though, to me is how many times Mario Lopez comes back.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this when we get to the reimagining, but I couldn't, like, watching that series, I couldn't help but feel like, man, you're such a loser. And like, then we look back at this and it's like, of course he became Bayside's like PE teacher. He never left town. He was always there when something was about to come down on some establishment he loved, you know? But like, this is kind of a turning point season for me. And I told you when you were doing the rewatch, I was like, it finds its footing in the first 4 seasons and then it just kind of coasts to the end. And I really do feel that way. I loved the addition of Lindsay McKeon. We'll talk about that in Cheers. But Anthony Harrell, yet again, he's just the black guy. They gave him this gimmick that like he sings and he really wants to be a singer, but he's a horrible singer. And the thing that's interesting to me is he was a recording artist, like with his family, with his brothers, and like they were an R&B group. He had several at-bats in the music industry, both before and during his time on this show. But they were really trying to make fetch happen with this guy can sing, and he was horrible. That's the only thing I remember about that guy. I hate him, and he's horrible. Then he becomes like the captain of the football team later on, and this guy is a toothpick.
Yeah.
Like that was like, it was like they were struggling to find something for him to do, and I don't like him, but I love the addition of Lindsay McKeon.
Fair enough. Well, let's get into season 5 then. Like you say, if they're kind of found their footing and here they go. If you can believe it though, there was only one casting change this season. Sarah Lancaster's Rachel Myers, she moves to Boston and is replaced by Ashley Lynn Kafagna, is that how you say this? As Liz Miller, who is captain of the girls' swim team. So yeah, captain of the football team, captain of the girls' swim team. This season, it does now take the anti-drug concept to the next level, having Maria experiment with smoking marijuana. You know, so she's smoking weed. It even repeats the infamous Jesse's Song story with Katie and Eric taking herbal stimulants to help them stay awake after their long hours at work. So they're all hopped up. And then Screech starts moonlighting as a security guard at the mall. So like this is like his Barney Fife. He's just like gonna get in everybody's business at the mall. The gang ends up going camping for a few episodes. This is the crazy one. They spend a few weeks abroad in France, and somehow this was not a crossover with the other Peter Engel show, which was airing at the same time, USA High. Will, you told us about that last episode. I was like, this was it, right? And I'm like, oh no, there's nothing. But we got to talk about the elephant in the room for season 5, and that is Screech's hair and voice. What was going on there, Will?
I don't know. Like, I've never found anything about it, but like, I would just say by this point, we're at season 5. This is his 4th season back. He's probably making decent money. This is probably when Dustin Diamond is starting to kind of lose his marbles. And it's just kind of coming through on screen. It's funny because I was watching something today, and I don't remember which season it was, but if I closed my eyes, it was like Dustin was really trying to do his best Urkel impression.
Yeah.
And it was like Screech already had been defined and developed. I don't know why the network notes were like, give us more Urkel in season 5. Like, I don't know. There were a lot of questionable choices, but as I told you, I kind of don't acknowledge anything from 5 through 7. They're just making episodes. Nothing is sacred during this time period.
I mean, it is bizarre because it's Jaleel White, the last season of Family Matters, trying to keep doing the Urkel voice, and he just can't anymore. And that's what it is. Like, he is notching it up. Like, his voice is like an alien or a little goblin. It's like more high pitched now, but kind of having a gravel to it. It's so weird. Like the first 4 seasons, or 3, I guess, that he was back, right? He's doing like the kind of the Zoinks Shaggy character that he always did, but he still had a grip on reality. And I feel like here on out, he's acting like it's his first day among humans every episode. Like he's an alien from Men in Black that it got into Screech's body. Because even in the last episode of the series, he should be giving a heartfelt speech in a normal voice, and he can't because he's committed to this new voice. And so it ruins the moment. And it's only this season also, I mentioned his hair, but he's got this giant afro that can't sustain itself, so it falls to the back of his head, and it's just like hanging around his head. And I thought, the hair goes away, so the voice is going to go away. But no, he keeps it until the end of the series. And I don't know if it was a Dustin Diamond choice or a network choice, but it will take you out of every episode as soon as he shows up.
That's one of those stories where you find out it's like, oh, Dustin was filming a telenovela between breaks. So he had to keep this look. Well, season 6 and 7 only have one cast change, and that is the departure of the Ryan Parker character, and introduction of yet another Valley transfer student, Tony Dillon, played by Tom Wade Huntington. In a strange coincidence, the Tony character is almost identical in appearance to the actor that will play Zach and Kelly's son, Mac Morris, in the Peacock reimagining. We'll talk about that next time. In this season, Mr. Belding and Screech start working in the Sharper Image type store at the mall, while the kids start police and fire cadet training for several episodes before their final preparations for college after graduation. By the end of the series, Mr. Belding is recruited to become Dean of Students at a college in Tennessee and leaves Bayside when this class graduates. Adam, how do you feel about this as a finale for the Bayside saga?
Well, I mean, it's interesting to watch, right? Because like you were indicating before, Maria really becomes the center of the show at this point. It felt like most of the action kind of revolves around her. She's the veteran of the cast, clearly really the most charismatic, or comedic, and charismatic. But I would say despite my earlier disappointment in the lack of continuity about the future students of Bayside and the fate of Mr. Belding, I do like that he is choosing to move on. Like, it would have been sad to see him keep trying to relive the golden years with Zach and the gang at Bayside forever, which is what it felt like. Every new group of students, he's striking up like, oh, you guys are the core group that I focus all my attention on. But luckily he had Screech, so he was kind of off doing his own thing usually anyway. I will say the graduation ceremony on that last episode, it's sweet. I was not connected to the characters, but I felt like they did a good job with it. Like they put Peter Angle up on the stage, like he's like a superintendent or something, and they're saying goodbye to Mr. Belding. Screech gives him this oil painting or something of him that's going to hang in the halls of Bayside forever. The only thing is, they sing the Bayside graduation song, so the cast is up on the stage singing that, but they add some soul to it with this Harrell guy, and he ain't got it.
No. They really wanted him to be like a Brandy situation, where it's like you watch Moesha and then you're like, wait, Moesha can sing? It'd be this like cross media kind of deal. Like he couldn't do it. And they really wanted you to think he could sing. And the sad thing is like black kids weren't watching this show. Not at this point. Like watching it, I was like, do white kids think he can sing? Because there's that whole thing of like Simpsons would make fun of it. You throw a couple like trills in something, some vibrato, and it's like, well, he can sing, but it's a different kind. You know what I mean? But it's like, no, nobody here thinks he can sing. Like, he is not good.
But as somebody who was actually, invested in this series in general, invested in the original series, how did you feel about this?
It was more impactful than it should have been. This ties into like what I've said before of like what this franchise has meant to me like throughout life. So I'm watching this taped off TV in my freshman year college dorm room. I like to watch things when they're supposed to air, even if it's not live. So I'm watching this tape Saturday morning, even though it aired like months prior. And this is like a morning after a cappella rehearsal and that kind of thing. So it's like, how like college is like finding yourself and all that. And like I'm sitting here in college watching like we're saying goodbye to Bayside, this fixture of our lives for the past decade. It was more impactful that it was just like this chapter of my life closing, but the departure of Belding meant more than the kids. And I'll get into that in years, but ultimately it was emotional for me to say goodbye to this franchise and this decade of my life, and Mr. Belding leaving sort of like clinched it. As for the kids, I don't miss those characters, but it was really like, wow, what happens to Belding and Screech now? And I know at some point in time, this is probably like apocrypha at this point, there are reports that they tried to develop a spinoff of Belding either like leading a boarding school or following him to this college. So it was like they weren't really ready to give up on Belding yet, but I guess that fell through. So this seemed like the end of Belding for me. And it's like, I don't know, Saved by the Bell, it always sounds hokey, but it is such a fixture for a certain generation because it was always there. Like in a lot of ways, Saved by the Bell is our MASH.
Yeah.
Because it's always in syndication. It was 5 days a week before that class even graduated. And it's just sort of like, that was it. Because the new class wasn't revered as such. Like USA picked up the off-network rights, but they only aired it for like 2 years or so. Like they weren't airing it by the time it ended. So it's just kind of like this thing in my life was just like gone. It's the same way like the fact that Power Rangers is quote unquote over now has affected me. 30 years of that over. 10 years of Saved by the Bell over. So like that's kind of how that finale left me.
Well, this has been a journey through a television series that, again, I wasn't super tied to, but even just researching for the show, I was like, wow, there's a lot going on. So let's see what we can say they did right as we give it our cheers. We really have to be fair to it. How does it shine as a standalone TV series without being compared to the original? Because that's what it was seeking to do after that first season is how do we make this kind of its own thing? I feel like the chances they took, I really do applaud. Random Swiss guy in the cast, okay. I mean, let's just see where you take that. Like send them to France, okay. Have them work at the mall, like half the episodes it feels like taking place there in the middle seasons. Like it just, I feel like they did a lot of things to make it unique, and even like you said, no central character. It really is an ensemble, and then you're just kind of following the lives of these kids, and there's jokes, but there's maybe a little bit more angst and drama in some cases. I could say they did find something unique to make it their own, even though familiar setting, but even the angles they would shoot Bayside at changed. You saw different sides of Bayside, even just the hallway set. And I was like, okay, so that's another excellent choice that you've made. So I did like that about it. Is okay, I can say it's not just a ripoff, like I always thought all these years, of the original series, and they just were beating a dead horse. It's like, no, they really did go for it. But what are your main cheers, Will?
Well, I look back at you've often asked who stuck with the show this long, who was watching at this point. And that's a good question in that I guess the reboot, the rebranding was meant to capture kids who were the same age we were when the original launched. But I don't think that's necessarily to its strength. The reason I stuck with it all that time, we've talked about how the original launched when we were 9 and 10, and we were kind of oh, this is what high school is going to be like. And then we were sorely disappointed. But with the new class, I was in high school as this was going. So it was kind of they were contemporaries, maybe not those first 3 seasons, but once it found its footing and it could just kind of coast. And then you got to factor in adolescence and all that. Before, it's just hey, this is kind of a wacky show about these 6 kids who aren't bad to look at, and they get in wacky adventures. But then I'm watching the new class, and then suddenly 14-year-old Will is she's hot. Just I don't care about this plot or anything like that. Back in the old days, if you put a gun to my head and I had to choose one, I'd be Jesse Spano, whatever. But I got a favorite throughout this entire series. So they were more contemporaries for me at that point. And through that lens, I think it works as a standalone show. I feel its only failure is that first season in terms of trying to reinvent the wheel that had come before. It found its own footing and its own voice by season 2. I also appreciate that the constant change in enrollment opened the doors for new relationships and new interactions. We don't have the same 6 kids all 7 seasons. They interact with each other differently, and then personalities change. We're talking about with Maria Lopez. She starts as the street smart kid. She finishes as the pretty fashionista because the show needed a pretty fashionista, and she stepped up. It wasn't an organic change. She just came back in season 6 and is I run this now and I wear dresses. That's really how they handled it. And we don't need explanations for everything, but also this was kind of a drop-in show. TV now is an event, and we're in peak TV, and you got to watch everything, and it all builds to something. This is a show that was perfect for syndication, where you see an episode and you're well, yep, this is Saved by the Bell. You may not know who that kid is, but you can tell those 2 are dating, and you can tell they're getting in wacky adventures. It's not meant to be taken seriously. You can't really adhere to continuity or timeline or anything like that. It's guilty pleasure television, and I think it works without any ties to the original series.
For sure. And I'll just say one last thing is that, I only watched a handful of episodes from each season, but every time I did, it surprised me. Even though I said I found some plots that I had seen before on the series. Oh, they're doing this? Oh, they're going this direction. So the fact that they can always surprise me with each episode, I think is something in its favor. However, this is a series that we don't find in syndication everywhere. This is a series that, is something that people don't talk about online. It's not oh, remember, when Ryan did this? I'm no, I don't remember when Ryan did that. So there is not a fandom for the series, and there's got to be a reason for that. So let's find out what that might be in our cheers.
Well, outside of Star Trek The Next Generation, the new new shows have no footprint. You know, nobody talks about the new WKRP in Cincinnati. Nobody talks about the new Gidget. Nobody talks about the new Leave It to Beaver. Nobody talks about what's happening now. There's just this whole kind of like stigma against these continuation shows that in many cases, what's happening now had 5 seasons in syndication. New WKRP in Cincinnati had like 4 to 5 seasons. It's almost like we're ashamed that they went back to the well when like they actually like built on these core concepts that still had legs. But there's something about entertainment that it just feels like a cop-out that they went back to this established property.
Yeah, no, that's not something that I would point to in my jeers to say, oh, you know, like, oh, they're in the same place. Like, I think you could do something with that. But what I do think is a big mistake of the series, I mean, it helped and it hurt. And that is bringing back Screech. And I say that because they needed it. They needed a big thing to happen that would get people's attention. But if they could have maybe phased him out after 3 seasons or something, but he became the star of the show. Now he is the Fonzie. Now he is the Urkel. Like it's like, yeah, you're there for the kids, but it always felt like the big moment, the big laughs were with Screech. And I think that kind of took away from it being an ensemble, even though that was always like the Screech story was the B story, the Screech and Belding. It does feel sort of uneven to me in that way. Whereas like, could they have found funnier kids or could they have given more opportunities for them to shine? And it just felt like they never could find a good Screech replacement. So he was there to fill the void. And then by association, Mr. Belding kind of got stupider and stupider going along with Screech's schemes. And so like, yeah, by season 5, 6, 7, as I'm watching this, I'm just like, this is really tired, especially the voice. But like, it just felt like there was too much focus on Screech, but then they couldn't detach themselves. And I just think that had to have driven a lot of people away. Like, oh, this is kind of stupid. Like maybe I can get into the teen drama, but not the goofy Screech stuff.
I can see that. I think the show made the same mistake that I think Power Rangers eventually makes in that for the first 4 seasons of the new class, there's good overlap in terms of new students and departures and things like that. But again, once you get to season 5, they start dropping in these people that you don't get to know or care about. Power Rangers does this thing where after In Space, which is the Zordon saga, every year you get a new team and a new cast and you stick with them for those like 39 episodes and then you get another team. So it's like once they start introducing people in season 5, I had the biggest crush on Lindsay McKeon. Like I really did. So I love that Katie Peterson character. But then you get like Ashley Lynn Cafagna, who is supposed to be like the hot girl. And she is, like she's the swimmer and all that, but all she is the hot girl. She has no personality. They don't develop these characters. Once like Tony Dillon comes in at the end, I don't give a damn about that guy. I couldn't care less about that guy. And it's like you're supposed to care that he has this backstory with Maria because they were together at Valley and they're trying to like basically they were Valley's Zach and Kelly and we're supposed to like root for them to rekindle that here at Bayside. Do not care. The people they just start sprinkling in is to like fill out the ranks. It was almost like they were too stuffed. Like they were just characters who fell by the wayside. They didn't get to shine. And then it's that whole aspect of in order to make it work with all of these new characters, nothing was sacred in terms of characterization. Like going back to Maria Lopez. Like Maria Lopez graduates as a person who Maria Lopez who entered Bayside would have loathed, you know? But it was like Sarah Lancaster was the fashionista. She leaves. So like, well, we need a fashionista. Well, Maria's here. Let's just change her personality wholesale. I give them credit for trying new things, but certain things like we go back to the Vicky character. Did teenagers really relate to a hypochondriac? She's a neurotic hypochondriac. Now we'll look at it in 2024 eyes and say it was really groundbreaking how she clearly was battling mental illness in a high school setting. But like that's not what they were going for. She's a hypochondriac who's neurotic about everything and kind of annoying. She's only allowed to be in the group because Megan puts up with her. So it's like they took some risks, like you said, but they missed a lot more than they hit.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that's what it comes down to is they were searching the entire series. They were trying to catch lightning in a bottle again, and they thought it had to fit what they had done before. So over and over again, like you say, they're just plugging this person in, they're plugging this person in, and you don't feel like there's a core cast. I mean, there are those people who are there for multiple seasons, but like that's the other thing too is like, what is the timeline here for people who are going to graduate, who's not going to graduate? Are they all in the same grade? The first season kind of didn't happen. That's wiped away. It feels like just like so many things where you're just like, by the end, yeah, Maria's been there a little too long. When they're being like firemen or whatever they're going to do there, you're like, are you in college and looking for a career? Like, I don't understand. So yeah, it just gets really sloppy.
It commits the cardinal sin of MTV's The Real World because like you mentioned this before where like the acting, they're not great. Now people could say like we're expecting too much, but I watch a lot of Disney Channel because I am a weird person. I watch something like Jesse and Bunked, and those kids are charismatic. These kids were attractive, but they weren't charismatic. So my deal is going back to the MTV The Real World. It was a groundbreaking, pivotal, important show until Vegas. And the problem with Vegas is everybody was hot. And they learned the wrong lesson from Vegas. And after that season, everybody had to be hot. So the Real World fell from grace because instead of it being these people from different backgrounds learning about each other and like confronting their own opinions on things, it was like, how many hot people can we get drunk? And it's the same deal with Saved by the Bell, the new class. Once you hit season 5, it's really like, how many cute kids can we cast? It wasn't about the acting. It wasn't about like chemistry or charisma. It's just like, oh, he'll look cute on the cover of Tiger Beat. Because I look at Tony Dillon and I get why, but he didn't work. On paper, I get how you would see his headshot and be like, oh, this is going to be big man on campus. But like, none of these characters are iconic. No. None of them.
You can't point to anybody, unfortunately. Yeah. So that's the thing. Maybe some of these kids needed a personality implant to give them that charisma factor. And maybe they would have come to our clinic because, Will, we are the show doctors. Yes, the series lasted longer than the original. I don't know what all the machinations are as to why that occurred, but there is a report that by the last 2 seasons, definitely the show's ratings were declining very heavily, and that led to its cancellation. So the question I have is this. Obviously, it didn't need to go on. I mean, there are shows like the Degrassi franchise that have gone on and on and on, but I think we need to imagine what would have been necessary to launch a successful next installment of the Saved by the Bell franchise, because they put the cap on it. Like you said, they were considering maybe a Mr. Belding focus series or something like that. But what could we do? So I'm going to say this, Will, but I think there could have been a Dawson's Creek style teen drama called Baysiders. Like in 2005 or something. They give it a little bit of time, and it's like a reimagining of sorts, but not necessarily in the comedic vein, although I probably would have preferred that. But it feels like the next evolution of the concept for me. You go from the goofy teen comedy well having run dry. This is a show focused on the Kapowski family, living in the Palisades and dealing with being a lower middle class in an upper class community, right? And so you have the Kapowski siblings, Nikki, Kyle, and Billy, who are all established characters on Saved by the Bell. So they would be the main focus of the series, not the same actors, but the same names, right? Now, Nikki is like the heart of the family. She's always fallen for the wrong guys, getting into trouble. There's drama there. Kyle would be the troublemaker. You know, he finds a sweet, rich girlfriend that tries to help him get the chip chip off his shoulder, but he's always getting offended or jealous or whatever's happening. And Billy would be gay because it was 2005. We're attempting to deal with those issues on TV more openly.
Was Billy the baby in the gym bag?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, of course, Tiffany Amber Thiessen is going to make a cameo in the pilot and during Sweeps Week every year if we get more seasons than one. But the only other actor from Saved by the Bell that I feel like they could get to come back at some point is going to be Essence Atkins, who is a vice principal at Bayside now. And if you don't know the name, she was the actress who was fired after the College Years pilot. So it would be a deep cut for nerds like us. Baysiders on NBC, fall 2005. Whose side are you on? Ah, I got the tagline and everything.
Oh, that is great. I'd watch that. It only lasts a season, but
Yeah.
I'd watch that. I'd put it on the WB though.
Oh, that's where
like,
it belongs. Yeah.
yeah, right after Savannah. We do show doctors in the whole thing of like, how could we breathe new life into it? How could we have kept it going? It ended when it needed to. Like, by that point, TNBC was a shell of its former self, and like, it had already pivoted to the things that make us uncomfortable that we've discussed, where it's like the teen shows without laugh track. Like most of TNBC by this point, there was like a show called Skate that was like SK8 about like a skateboarder and stuff like that. And it wasn't comedy. It was like Degrassi or maybe some Canadian thing Nickelodeon turned down, you know? So like its time was done then. I think it could have been reimagined with the same spirit and even Dennis Haskins, because that man is still a cheerleader for this franchise to this day. We had Saved by the Bell night at the Bowie Bay Sox last summer, and I had like COVID and couldn't go. That man is still carrying the torch for this franchise. I would bring it back 20 teens, like a little after when you would have done it, and I could get into the weeds of like studios and network relationships and why this wouldn't happen, but I always come back to the Jessies and the Bunks of the world, and it works like That's So Raven is Saved by the Bell. They even use the same set. There was this kind of handoff in the early aughts where it was like the kids who wanted a Saved by the Bell experience were getting better things on Disney. It's like, sure, Hannah Montana's whatever, but like I was really into Raven's Home, which is the new That's So Raven, because we're still doing that whole thing. It's the same brand of humor. It's a quote-unquote family show that either works in the morning, it works at 1 a.m., it works at 7 p.m. on Friday. Like, there's still a space for that. So I would bring it back like 20 teens, new bunch of pretty kids, bring back Dennis Haskins, throw that thing up on Disney, and call it a day. It would be like a homecoming. You know, it started on Disney, it came back to Disney. That's how I would treat it, because I don't think anything's wrong with the formula. It's like boy bands. Lou Pearlman, for all of his faults, figured out the recipe, and he would proceed to crank those things out. In America, most people know Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and they might know O-Town, but they think it stopped there. That man formed like 12 groups internationally. I have all those albums. Natural, Take 5, like all of these guys, and like it's printing money. So I just feel like you let it rest for a while, because a lot of these franchises don't do that. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is perfect at that. Comes out for like 4 years, then it takes a rest for about 4 years till the next generation grows up, because there's always going to be teenage girls, and there's always going to be this heartthrob aspect. That's what this show was built on. Like, you and I grew up on this, and like we're talking about it now, but at the end of the day, TNBC wasn't designed for us. We stumbled upon it and we liked what we saw, but it is a tween girl focused enterprise, and we still have tween girls and they still watch things. Like, now it would have to have like a TikTok component or something like that. But I think a Saved by the Bell revival 5 years before we get the Peacock one would have been just fine. And it would have eliminated the need for the Peacock one.
So, Will, last thing I gotta ask you though, we went through so many cast members. We talked about, who was in, who was out. I'm just curious, there's gotta be a few of them out there who have some sort of notoriety, who went on to like do something of interest. Give me a few highlights. Who are we talking about here?
Okay, so the vast majority of the cast members, especially the women, ended up on soap operas. Like, that's just how it worked. Like, Natalia Cigliuti did a lot of Fox primetime soaps. But then you've got the other ones like Ashley Lynn ended up on soaps. Lindsay McKeon ended up on soaps. That's just where they ended up. But Isaac Lidsky, who played Weasel in the first season, he was diagnosed with a degenerative eye disease the same year he was cast in the new class. Now, he ends up getting fired for season 2, but he goes on to Harvard, and then he becomes the first blind person to serve as a law clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court. Look at that. Saved by the Bell cast member in those upper echelons of law, And then we've got Bianca Lawson. Now, in the Black community, we think she's a vampire. In fact, we think she might be the vampire that turned Morgan Freeman. Because,
Wow.
I mean, like, the difference is Bianca Lawson became a vampire when she was like 16, and Morgan Freeman was bitten when he was like 62. But, like, it's interesting that her wiki lists no age, and she hasn't aged a bit in 30 years. To further complicate matters, she was at one time Beyonce's stepsister, and her mother was the niece of Motown founder Berry Gordy. So there's some crazy Black Illuminati stuff going on over there, But my final one, and we're kind of ending on a downer here, but I told you I loved Lindsay McKeon. And during her time on the show, she dated the son of Donald Sterling. Now, if you're not familiar with that name, he owned the Clippers, and he was ousted in a very controversial fashion. There's actually a recent miniseries about it with Larry Fishburne and Ed O'Neill starring as Donald Sterling. Well, the day that Lindsay McKeon and Sterling Jr. broke up, he got into a fight with a friend whom he thought was trying to steal her from him, and he proceeded to shoot this friend with a shotgun.
Wow.
That's right, Saved by the Bell, the new class cast member with Helen of Troy in a murder.
Now, one more downer that you did inform me of. I was talking about our Swiss friend, Christian Oliver, and you said he recently passed away in a plane crash?
Oh, do we really want to go there? He and his daughters.
Oh.
They were on a plane that went down back in January, and there were no survivors.
Man.
And the crash is currently under investigation. He was 51.
Yeah, that is a bummer. So we got to go out, though, on something peppy, something to get us up. And that is, you mentioned Sarah Lancaster ended up on Chuck.
Yes.
And I think that is a show that's got to be on our spreadsheet. We got to be covering Chuck one of these days. That is a series. My best friend loves it, and he's always pushed it for me. I've seen the first season at least. So I think it's worth saying that in the future, if you're a fan of Chuck, we will likely be talking about it. Because that was what, 2 seasons or 3?
It's more than that.
Really?
It was the little show that could. They kept reducing orders, but I mean, the box set is this.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully by the time we cover it, we love Zachary Levi again, because he ain't doing so well in pop culture.
He's a little awkward right now, that is for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But we are coming upon the end of the summer. That's right. We're approaching the sunset. Saved by the Summer had to come to a close sometime. So next time around, as you've been teasing, we will be discussing the 2020 Saved by the Bell reimagining sequel series that aired on the Peacock streaming service for 2 seasons. There's a lot to talk about with this show. Let me just tell you that. How many people subscribe to Peacock? Not very many. I did just for this show. So I am looking forward to talking about it. We will get into that conversation next time around. So stay tuned. Tell your friends, if they are Saved by the Bell lovers like yourselves, to tune into our previous episodes. You can catch up as we get to our finale here. But Will, in the meantime, if people want to catch you cutting class online, where can they find you?
Well, They can find me on social media at William B. West or my website, westweekever.com. And just for the record, we discussed my favorite installment tonight, so I hope that came across, because I'm going to be real salty next episode.
Well, in the meantime, you can find me at Hoju Coolander on all the socials. You can go to geekster.com or go to Geekster Vision on YouTube, which is all formerly the Retro Network, fully rebranded to Geekster Media now. And you can find all the other shows that I'm involved with there. But we thank you so much for checking out this episode. And until next time, class dismissed.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.